So a couple of months ago, I did a full review on this Anker Solix E10 whole home power backup solution. And in that video, I got a couple of comments, or several comments actually, from people who were suggesting that they thought it was actually pretty similar to the EcoFlow DELTA Pro Ultra. And after going down the rabbit hole on the specs for both units, I'm inclined to agree with that, at least on paper. There's definitely a lot of overlap between these two units. And now that I've finally actually gotten my hands on a DELTA Pro Ultra, I can run it through the paces and see for myself how they really compare and where there might be some significant differences worth considering. Among other things, I'm really interested in finding out if a single DELTA Pro Ultra configuration like this one can handle my 3-ton central air conditioning startup or not. So that for me was a huge benefit of this E10 system, which was able to handle that without issue, while even the massive dual Bluetti AC500 setup was not able to do that. So this is going to be an interesting test. And of course, since you're here, I'll take you along for the ride. So let's first take a quick look at the unboxing and assembly experience of this DELTA Pro Ultra, and then we'll take a closer look at what input and output ports it's got so we can get a clear understanding of the differences as well as the similarities between this guy and the E10. So as you can see, assembly is pretty straightforward. Just screw in the casters on the trolley base, tighten them up with a wrench, and then you're pretty much ready to go. Stack the battery module on the trolley, and then stack the inverter module on top of the battery. And unlike the E10, there actually is an external cabled connection between the batteries and the inverter, but it's a low profile cable with 90-degree connectors, so still maintains a very clean look. So after you've done that, you're good to go. All right, so on this right side panel here, we've got a DC 30 amp output here, 12 volt 30 amp. It's an Anderson style. And then down here, we've got what looks roughly like a XT90, I would say. So this is our low power solar input, and this takes a minimum of 30 volts up to a maximum of 150 volts DC. And the charge controller through this particular port will only pull a maximum of, it looks like 15 amps. And then it looks like we got an AC charging port down here to plug the included AC charging cable that comes in the box. And then there's a nice physical switch here for between fast and slow charging, so you don't necessarily have to pop in the app to get to that. Taking a look over here at the similar panel on the left side, there is simply just what it says, a 4G module and what looks to be like a USB port down here. And I'm assuming this is for cellular monitoring connection if you don't have Wi-Fi where you happen to be. Taking a look at the right side of the DELTA Pro Ultra, we've obviously got our battery connection here. So one battery connection here. If you stack multiple batteries, they will sort of stagger back and forth. So if I had two of them, the second one would connect into this one here, and then it would connect down below. I like that these doors recess. I was a little curious about how those actually came off. They don't come off, they actually just slide in. So that's nice. A little thoughtful engineering. Up here we've got a power in and out port. This is a connection to EcoFlow's power panel that allows you to connect this into your power panel and puts input and output. So this is for fast charging rather than the AC charging port that was over here on the side. And it's also for feeding the panel to power your house. Over here we have our high solar input, and over here we've got a separate disconnect and a single set of MC4 connectors. So you've got to have at least 80 volts up to a maximum of 450 volts, which I really like because 450 volts gives you a lot of flexibility in how you configure your panels. And so through this one, you've got about 4,000 watts of solar input, and then through the one that's over here on the corner, right on this side, this one will give you up to 1,600 watts total. So if you can use them both simultaneously, giving you a max total solar input on this DELTA Pro Ultra single head unit of about 5,600 watts. And by the way, if you're wondering what all this weighs, the main top inverter unit weighs about 70 pounds. And each of these batteries, which are, I believe, 6.1 kilowatts each, so just a little over 6,000 watts, these are 112 pounds each. So just one battery in the inverter is a combined 182 pounds. So this thing is pretty hefty, and generally you should probably think of this as a two-person job. Now in terms of physical dimensions, it is about 36.9 inches wide in this direction, and about 27.2 inches deep in this direction, and about 16.4 inches high if you don't include the trolley. So the trolley is going to add another 5 inches or so, so call it 21.4 inches approximately in height with a single battery and a single DPU inverter unit. Now in terms of the buttons on the front, we've got our AC inverter button, which is single press, turns the AC inverter on, and then we can turn on our DC buttons, which are the USB 100 watts over here, and then these USB-A 12 watts over here. So we'll turn those off. Notice that there is no 12 volt car socket adapter on a unit like this. So there is the 30 amp DC Anderson connection over here that you could connect something like that to, because this is a 12 volt out. But this is really designed to be wired into like a fuse block that's going to feed a variety of 12 volt appliances directly. So that's really designed for a larger 12 volt system rather than just a 12 volt 10 amp plug. Okay, now that we got a basic sense of what the Delta Pro Ultra is bringing to the table, let's quickly run through the key specs on these two units to get a sense of how similar they actually are. And to conserve syllables, I'll just refer to the Delta Pro Ultra from here on out, mostly, as the DPU. Now, just from a physical appearance standpoint, the DPU does seem quite a bit more compact than the E10, even when you take into the account that this particular E10 setup has an extra 6 kilowatt hour battery module in the stack. But in terms of actual volume, they're actually pretty similar. It's just that the E10's form factor tends to consume more vertical space, while the DPU has a bit of a deeper footprint, which consumes just a bit more floor space. Now, in terms of power output, a single DPU is rated for up to 7.2 kilowatts continuous with a 10.8 kilowatt surge, while the E10 is rated for 7.68 kilowatt continuous. And it's worth also noting that the E10 can actually handle a full 10 kilowatts for up to about an hour in turbo mode, but it can also handle up to a 28 kilowatt surge. Now, both of these units can be paralleled with up to 2 additional inverter modules for a total of 3, which for the DPU means a continuous 21.6 kilowatts, and for the E10 up to 23 kilowatts continuous. So while not completely the same AC output specs, they are reasonably close. Now, in terms of battery capacity options, both the DPU and the E10 are virtually identical in this department, allowing you to connect up to 5 of these 6.144 kilowatt hour battery modules for a maximum capacity on a single inverter module of up to 30 kilowatt hours, and a maximum expanded capacity if you have 3 inverter modules of up to 90 kilowatt hours. Now, for AC charging, the DPU can charge from wall power or a 120 volt gas generator at up to 1800 watts, or you can actually pair it with, if you want, an optional EcoFlow smart home panel, or with a 240 volt gas generator and using an optional 240 volt charging cable, you can charge it at up to 3000 watts. Now, the E10 also lets you charge with 120 volts at up to 1800 watts, but if you pair it with the Anker Solix smart generator, you can actually charge at direct DC current at up to 4.5 kilowatts, or with the smart inlet panel like I'm using here, up to 7.6 kilowatts. So definitely a slight edge for the E10 in this particular category if you're doing that smart panel integration. But if you're relying on gas generator charging, the E10 really only has the edge if you're using the Anker Solix smart generator. For any other kind of generator, you'd be stuck at a max of 1800 watts, which would give the DPU a slight edge on generator charging. Now, for solar charging, the DPU has both a low voltage and a high voltage solar input. And if you max out both of those inputs, you can get a maximum of 5.6 kilowatts of solar input. Now, on the other hand, the E10 also has 2 solar inputs, and they're both high voltage, which combined can deliver up to a total of 9 kilowatts of solar input. So in terms of raw solar input capacity, the E10, again, does have a clear edge here. Now, both units do allow you to do a direct connection to either, say, a manual transfer switch, like this guy right here, or to an optional smart panel for an automatic backup cutover, and a number of other smart integration features. Now, they both have UL 9540 certifications, and they both come with a 5-year warranty backed by a well-established, reputable brand. They even weigh nearly the same, with the base 6 kilowatt hour DPU setup like this guy here weighing in at a combined 182 pounds, and the base 6 kilowatt hour E10 system coming in at a combined 190 pounds. Even the current pricing on these units is very similar. So a base 6 kilowatt hour E10 configuration will run you about $4,300, and a maxed out 30 kilowatt hour configuration will cost you a hefty $12,300. Now, those same 2 configurations on the Delta Pro Ultra are a couple of $100 less, with the 6 kilowatt hour base configuration coming in at $4,100 and the max 30 kilowatt hour configuration about $12,100. So I doubt price alone is going to be the deciding factor for anyone who's trying to decide between these particular units. Okay, let's talk about some of the key differences now, other than that solar input spec, which I already mentioned and is clearly one of those differences. So the DPU has a full complement of output ports, giving you 4 3-prong 20 amp 120 volt outlets, a TT30 120 volt outlet, and an L1430 240 volt outlet. Whereas the E10 doesn't come with any outlets at all built in, but they do have an adapter cable that's optional that will give you 2 20 amp outlets and a 1450 240 volt outlet. But as I said, that's an optional cable. And the DPU also does have both USB-A and USB-C ports conveniently located right up here on the front of the unit, whereas the E10 has neither of these USB ports. So it's probably also worth noting that the DPU also does have a very nice, large, clear digital display on the front, while the E10 has a kind of light bar animation here, which does give you an approximate sense of what the current state of charge is and whether or not it's in an actual charging state. But to get any detailed information at all, you do need to log into the Anker Solix mobile app. Okay, since I haven't previously done a full review on this DPU like I have done on the E10, let's go run this guy through some key performance tests and see if we can uncover any other important differences or maybe anything else that you might want to be aware of. All right, as you can see, we are fully recharged. We want to run a capacity test, a usable capacity test. Now this, with the single battery on the bottom, has 6,144 watt hours of capacity. So if we do the standard sort of 20% discharge rate, or otherwise known as 0.2C, that comes out to just a little over 1,200 watts. So to do that, I'm just going to use one of these 20 amp ports over here, and we are going to turn on the AC inverter and try to get this thing as close to 1,200 watts as we can. All right, so as you can see, we are peaked out here at 1,226 watts. That's about perfect for a 0.2C. And we are accumulating watt hours, and we are even under load, just a hair under 120 volts. So that's very good voltage. And let's go back to watts, and we're going to let this thing run all the way down until the BMS shuts us down, and we'll find out how many watt hours we actually get out of that rated 6,144. All right, looks like our capacity test is done. Let's go ahead and plug this into grid power. And before we do that, let's just real quick check to see if the unit is fully drained. It does power up and we are at 0%. So let's plug this into the wall and take a look at what we got. All right, so as you can see, we got 5,850 watt hours usable. Now that's out of that rated 6,144, which gives us a well above average and pretty outstanding 95.2% usable capacity. That is extremely impressive. So, one of the best usable capacity numbers that I have seen. So this DELTA Pro Ultra is really bringing the heat, at least as far as usable capacity goes. Very impressive. All right, since we do have the unit fully depleted, let's go ahead and do the solar wake and charge test. And I'm going to connect just about 3,000 watts of solar. Now it's totally dark right now, so we're not going to be getting anything, but the high voltage solar input is over here on this right side behind this top left panel. This is the solar input I've currently been using with the E10 unit. I've just moved it over to here. Now it may or may not even register anything, but like I said, it is like 10 o'clock at night. Totally dark, and we're going to check back in the morning and see if this thing has awakened itself and begun charging off of solar like we hope it does, because we don't want to have to interact with it in order for it to start doing its thing. So we'll check back in the morning and we'll see what's what. All right, it is about 8:30 in the morning. As you can see, we're pulling in about 700 watts currently, which is not surprising because I have a big shadowy fence line stripe across the bottom half of my solar panel array due to poor planning on my part. That's to be fixed much later, but more importantly, we're already at 2% and the unit is waking and charging on its own without me having to interact with it in the morning off of solar. So a definite pass on the wake and charge solar test. All right, as you can see, we're pulling in just over 1,000 watts currently on solar. So I'm kind of curious. I assume this is going to work, but let's try seeing if this thing will support dual charging. So we're going to connect AC at the same time and see if we can significantly improve our charging speed by charging via solar and AC at the same time. So this should add another 1,800 watts, and indeed it does. So now we are charging at just about 3.2 kilowatts, which will dramatically reduce our charge time to full. So right now we're at 13%, and at this current rate, should get us full charge in just under 2 hours. So, dual charging, confirmed. All right, now one of the things I was very impressed about when I was testing the E10 was it really was the first unit I tested that was able to handle the inrush current, startup current on my central air conditioning unit, which has an LRA, or locked rotor amperage rating, I think of 77 amps. And so it can handle quite a bit more than that, but it was able to handle that all on its own without adding multiple inverter units. So I'm kind of curious if this Delta Pro Ultra can do the same thing. So I've got this patched in up here with the L1430 into a manual transfer switch, and we'll go ahead and switch over the central air to inverter power. And then I'm going to put up on screen here the app for both the Delta Pro Ultra, and then I'm also going to switch over here to my thermostat app, and we are going to switch this to cooling mode, and we're going to see if this will allow us to start up. I just heard it actually, kicked on right away. Let's take a look at the Delta Pro Ultra. It definitely handled that locked rotor amperage of 77 amps. Gave me no sign of having a problem with that at all, and you can see we're currently pulling just under 1700 watts. So that test was a definite pass. I honestly didn't know how that was going to go. And the Delta Pro Ultra, even a single unit without having to parallel multiple ones together, doesn't seem to have a problem running a central air conditioning unit. I think this is maybe a 3-ton unit, and my house size for reference is about 2,300 square feet. So I have a single central air conditioner unit outside there. No problem. Delta Pro Ultra handled it just fine. All right, time to do a load test on this Delta Pro Ultra. Find out if we can sustain as close as we can get it to 7,200 watts of continuous output for a full 10 minutes. Now I've got this connected right now with the basic generator cable from this L1430 outlet on the front, and that goes around up here, and that connects to my manual transfer switch. Now, one of the things you need to keep in mind when you're connecting to a manual transfer switch and servicing loads there is that basically a 7,200 watt inverter, in this case a 240 volt output, is balancing between L1 and L2, so 220 volt lines at 3,600 watts each. So if you significantly exceed 3,600 watts on either one of those legs, you'll trip an overload even though your total output is less than 7,200 watts. So you need to try to keep your loads balanced, and when you put in a manual transfer switch, those should be balanced between L1 and L2 as well. So I've had to try to carefully balance the loads here so I can get close to that 7,200 watts, and we'll see how close I got it. So let's go ahead and start adding some load, and then we'll get the timer going as soon as we get to that maximum continuous output. All right, so first I'm going to switch over my electric water heater, and that should give us a pretty consistent, just south of 5,500 watts. All right, let me add a couple loads. I'm going to balance those between L1 and L2. And this should get us pretty close. I think this is about as close as I can get it, 7,100 watts. Without going over, let's go ahead and start the timer. All right, so definite pass on the 10-minute test. Now we weren't quite to 7,200, and that's because I really couldn't accurately balance the loads and get exactly to 7,200. But now I'm going to show you kind of what happens if we unbalance the loads slightly on one of the legs. So I'm going to add another about 150 watts on leg number 2 of that split phase output, and that's going to put us over the 7,200 watts. So let's see what happens when we do that. Kind of see how long we can get away with that. So now we're 70 watts over that rated 7,200. All right, 2 minutes. All right, so that's very good performance. Let me go ahead and add another 100 watts or so off of leg 2, and we're going to see if that actually trips it, because this is going to put us well over the 3,600 watt limit on one of those legs. So here we go. All right, coming up on 3 minutes, and we are 200 watts over the continuous rating. So very good performance. All right, we're coming up on 4 minutes, and we still have not tripped overload protection. So that's pretty impressive. I'm gonna go add a little bit more load to that L1 phase by flipping on some lights. All right, we're now at 7,487 watts. And we just got a 407 error that popped up. All right, and we tripped and is trying to recover. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove some of these loads. So, load test, definite pass. As long as you're using a nice balanced load across both of those L1 and L2 split phase outputs, very good performance from the DELTA Pro Ultra. All right, taking a quick look at how the mobile apps compare. I've got the Anker Solix mobile app on the left and the EcoFlow app on the right. And while the user interfaces are clearly quite different, the functionality is surprisingly similar. So scrolling down just a bit on the Anker Solix app, we can see that it's got some nice interactive power generation and consumption plots. And then over on the EcoFlow app, you can see that it's got pretty much the same kinds of interactive plots as well. Both of them allow you to sort of filter on day, week, month, and year for each plot type. I think the Anker Solix plots probably look just a little bit more interesting just simply due to the fact that I do have more data history from the E10 system than I do for the DELTA Pro Ultra system. But going into the settings on both apps, you can see that we have access to pretty much everything you might want to configure on a system like this. On the Anker Solix app, if we go into the power usage scenarios, you can see that the options here are very similar to the operating modes in the EcoFlow app, with just slight differences in how they label the modes. But both have configurable self-consumption and time of use modes, as well as backup modes and severe weather detection modes. And those modes basically override your operating modes during times when you're most likely to need your batteries fully topped off. And then because the DELTA Pro Ultra is also a little bit more power station-like in its design, it also has a couple of other options like automated tasks that allow you to schedule discharging and charging functions. And then there's also an EV charging configuration page, which does give you the ability to configure some specific behaviors around EV charging if you're using their optional EV charging cable that connects to that input-output port on the side of the DPU. So if you just direct connect an EV charger to that L1430 outlet on the front of the unit, these settings actually don't really do anything. But yeah, both the Anker Solix and the EcoFlow apps are extremely feature-packed, but somehow also manage to be quite user-friendly. All right, so clearly both of these units are very well engineered and very capable options. And I did test the inverter idle consumption, by the way, on both units. And unsurprisingly, they're very close on that spec as well, with the DPU's inverter consuming about 43 watts continuous and the E10 consuming about 45 watts continuous. So basically a dead heat. So which one is going to fit your needs the best? Well, I think that's really going to depend on how you're planning to use a solution like this. If you're truly looking for a dedicated home backup power solution, I think I'd be inclined to point you toward the Anker Solix E10 since it does have more solar input capacity and slightly higher continuous and peak AC output specs. And then if you're willing to go one step further with the Anker Solix and connect to one of their smart home panel options, it does give you some pretty cool hybrid integration. Without having to switch any specific circuits off the grid, it can actually monitor your home's total load demands in real time and then serve them with either solar, inverter, and battery power first, only tapping into the grid when the load exceeds what's available from the E10 system. And it does also give you the ability to deploy the solution outside if that's a better option for you, since it is IP66 and NEMA 4 weatherproof. And all of that is pretty cool, but let's face it, this is definitely not intended to be a portable solution in any practical sense. So if you do really need your backup power solution to also be able to be moved into a mobile setting or say perhaps a temporary off-grid location from time to time, while still giving you 90 to 95% of the E10's functionality as a whole home backup power solution, then I would definitely point you to the EcoFlow DELTA Pro Ultra, which is kind of a jack of all trades in this solution. And the fact that a single DPU configuration like this can still run your 3 or 4 ton central AC if you ever needed to is a definite bonus, since so far at least the only other solutions I've seen that can handle that without installing a soft start on your central AC would be the DELTA Pro Ultra X and the E10. So yeah, 2 very solid options to consider depending on your specific needs, or 3 options actually if you do include that DELTA Pro Ultra X. And per usual, I will leave links for your convenience down below, along with any discount codes that I might be able to score for you if you want to go explore any of these solutions for yourself. Okay, hopefully you found this comparison helpful. If you did, I'd very much appreciate it if you'd click that like button down below for me. So what do you guys think about this matchup? Did I miss anything? Are there any questions you still have about either of these systems that I didn't cover in the video? Let me know down in that comment section. I'd love to hear what you guys think. All right, I think that's a wrap. I do very much appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with me on this video, and I do hope you'll come back and join me for the next one. Until then, have fun out there.